This is Queensland Decides, the Great Debate.
Hello and welcome to The Great Debate. I'm Melissa Downs. In just 23 days, Queenslanders are going to an election to decide who will lead our state for the next 4 years. We know there are many undecided voters, so tonight we have the leaders of the two major parties facing off to win your support in this, the only debate before early voting opens. Welcome to Premier Stephen Miles and Opposition Leader David Crisafulli. They'll be taking questions from our expert panel representing Australia's largest media organisation. Nine's state political editor, Tim Arvier, 4BC Afternoon's host, Sophie Formica, and editor of the Brisbane Times, Sean Parnell. We are broadcasting not only on Channel 9 tonight, but also on 9 Now, through the website of the Brisbane Times and simulcast on Radio 4BC. So thank you all for joining us. We know voters have a lot of questions, so to make sure we cover as much ground as possible, both leaders have agreed to keep their answers to 60 seconds. When the time's running low, you'll see a counter on your screen. Now, our leaders also, they do not have any prepared notes, only a blank paper and a pen. Now, the Premier won the coin toss earlier and will give the first opening statement. Premier.
Thank you. This election is all about who Queenslanders trust to tackle the cost of living and to deliver a plan for our state's future. On cost of living, I took those progressive coal royalties and used them to deliver $1,000 on everybody's electricity bill, make public transport almost free, cut 20% off rego and give every Queensland child $200 so they could play community sport. But I also have plans for our state's future. On healthcare, to get the doctors and nurses and hospital beds that we need. On community safety, to make sure our state is safe. On delivering cheaper energy for the future, and on building homes for Queenslanders. On all of these issues, Queenslanders know where I stand and know that I will fight for them.
Premier, thank you. Opposition Leader David Crisafulli.
G'day, Premier. Good evening, Queensland. In 23 days, you can choose change. And the question you have to ask yourself is, after 10 years of Labor, are things better or worse when it comes to youth crime, health, housing, cost of living, and who's got the right plan for Queensland's future? I lead a united team, and we have set solutions and targets to deliver the change that Queenslanders need. In the next few weeks, and I expect tonight, Queenslanders will be subjected to a scare campaign. But I'm choosing hope. Hope over fear. And I'm asking you to choose hope over fear. We are a great state with a great future. Together, we can build a Queensland we are all proud of.
Gentlemen, thank you for those opening statements. I'm going to hand it over to the panel now. Nine State Political Editor Tim Arvier, would you like to lead the way?
Yeah, Premier, you've smashed open Queensland's piggy bank to pay for these short-term cost of living measures. If you're re-elected at any stage over the next 4 years, will you scale back energy rebates or rego discounts?
Well, you're right, some of these measures were short-term because the impacts of inflation and higher interest rates are short-term too, and they were designed to push down inflation. And just last week, the ABS credited our energy rebates and our public transport, our 50-cent public transport, with driving down inflation to below 3% for the first time in some time. But we also have plans for long-term cost of living action. 50-cent fares will be permanent now, and we have a plan for cheaper fuel and cheaper energy. So they are long-term plans to support Queensland families and households.
But bringing you back to that question, Queenslanders at home will want to know, do those things continue if you're re-elected for 4 years?
Well, as I've said, the measures that will continue are 50-cent fares, that energy price guarantee, the capping of fuel price increases. So we have comprehensive plans for the future, but those measures were designed to help right now through the challenges Queenslanders are experiencing right now.
Take it that
Next
good
question,
number.
Sophie Formica, 4BC Afternoons.
Thanks, Melissa. Mr Crisafulli, you're well aware of energy costs and the strain that it's putting on businesses and on households. The Premier believes that maybe an answer to that will be government-owned retailers, particularly for the regions. Can you give us some specific proposals that you are bringing to us when it comes to reliable, affordable and sustainable energy?
A maintenance guarantee to make sure that the power assets that Queenslanders own are actually operational. Now, over 1,000 days ago, the Callide power plant exploded because of a lack of maintenance. Today, in the middle of an election campaign, we had an energy minister in front of a court. And what Queenslanders need to know is that in order to fix those pressures they're under, of course there has to be interim measures, but we also have to take a long-term view. And my vision is to make sure that we have a maintenance guarantee to get those assets working. And I want to make sure that the energy we deliver is affordable, because we have to make sure that Queenslanders can have access to electricity that is affordable, reliable and sustainable. And we haven't had that for over 1,000 days. And that's why power prices in Queensland have increased by 19.9%. That's 3 times the national average. That's why we've backed short-term measures. But we also have a long-term plan to put downward pressure on those structural challenges.
And that long-term measure, you know, we know your position on nuclear energy. What do you say about moving forward? What does the future look like for energy in Queensland?
To get our baseload power stations back up and running to full capacity, they've been offline from full capacity for well over 1,000 days. So that's our interim measure. We have those assets and we have to get them working. We have to get them working for Queensland. We also have to make sure that where we bring on smaller pumped hydro, that it is affordable and can be done in the time frame that we're talking about. And at the moment, there is no coherent plan to do that, and we've put forward one. And I want Queenslanders to know, as a result of that, we can have an energy transition that is affordable, reliable and sustainable. It's all 3 elements of that, and our plan addresses that. That short-term commitment to get those assets working, and then a long-term sustainable plan to deliver that reliable and sustainable electricity.
Our next question is from Sean Parnell, editor of Brisbane Times.
Premier, before the campaign, you promised state-owned fuel stations to help keep prices down. As Sophie mentioned before, you've now promised another state-owned energy retailer to help keep prices down. Using that logic, why shouldn't we also have state-owned supermarkets, given the cost of living pressures there?
Well, in a state like Queensland, fuel and energy are different to other products. They are essentials, and there is a strategic role for government to make sure that in the case of fuel, prices don't bounce around wildly. Only Queensland experiences that because other states have more independence and more competition in their market. And so we've said we'll partner with independent fuel providers to deliver that more competition. Similarly, on energy prices, the private sector just would not deliver energy to regional Queensland. It's too expensive. That's why we have Ergon, but Ergon, because it has a monopoly, is restricted in offering discount tariffs. That's why we need a second provider, so people in regional Queensland have choice, and so that second provider can deliver the kind of discount packages that we have here in the southeast.
Mr Crisafulli, I know that you've also committed to 50-cent fares and continuing those off the back of the announcement that came from the Premier. And energy rebates have contributed $2.7 billion to the $9 billion hole that the state finds itself in as a budget deficit. Do you feel like you've been snookered into committing to these cost of living sweeteners that are short-term, that is a debt burden to the next generation of Queenslanders, and also a debt burden that you would inherit if you become leader?
You mentioned the $9 billion. The majority of that are cost blowouts on projects that ministers weren't held accountable for. Now, the reason why we back those measures in terms of the electricity rebate is Queenslanders are hurting. And they're hurting because our power plants aren't operating at capacity. And so it was responsible in order to help people in that way. But the real reason why Queensland's budget is under such pressure is because no one has been held accountable at a ministerial level for the cost blowouts, particularly on the delivery of road projects. I always point to the Coomera Connector as an example. That started as a $1.5 billion 6-lane road. It's now a 4-lane road at $3.1 billion. Now, nowhere else would that be acceptable. No one would accept that in their household. And yet it has become the new business as usual for government. Now, I believe that we should have respect for people's money, and that involves holding people accountable for doing what they say they're going to do, particularly particularly ministers. That's the way the Westminster system needs to work.
What are your
Premier,
energy rebates
excuse
going to
me
be?
for a minute, Tim. Premier, you look like you disagree.
I think I need to be able to respond to that, because the fact is everybody knows the cost of building in recent years has gone up dramatically. And if David is seriously saying that he would deliver projects for what they were estimated to cost 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, then he just could not deliver those projects. He would have to cut them. And my question to him is, he's going to hold ministers accountable for delivering projects where they aren't provided sufficient funds to build them. How will you hold them accountable? Are you going to sack those ministers? Will you sack them?
Ministerial accountability is important to me.
So you've got
I've seen-
$16 billion of
and I've
unfunded
seen-
commitments.
Well,
You should sack yourself.
Premier, you know that's not true.
16.2.
Premier, if I may. I used the Coomera Connector as an example before, but let me put it into terms that everybody would understand. Imagine going to a builder and saying, I want to build a home, and the builder says to you, yes, it's a 4-bedroom home and it's $600,000. And that builder comes back to you a year later and say, look, sorry, we've had a bit of a challenge. It's now a 3-bedroom home and it's 1.2 million. You would never accept it. And that's what's become business as usual. And I don't accept it. And the Premier said, would I hold ministers accountable? Of course. And you've seen by the way that we have put forward our costings down to the dollar, that it means something to me. I want Queenslanders to know that respect for your money matters, and I want to restore that to government.
But having said that, just as the Premier said, the only way that you'd be able to accomplish that is if you had fixed price contracts, and it's very difficult to do an infrastructure price or project knowing what the fixed price is going to be.
So if ministers have not got in and done the job of a minister, nor have they been held accountable. It's about making sure that at the front end you're doing the right project delivery methodology and that you have visibility along the way. And it hasn't happened for too long.
So I'll take from that you're going to cut the Coomera Connector.
But see, that's
you're going to try to
ridiculous
deliver
thing
it
to
for the
say.
original estimate.
Look, I know you want to put on a show, but I want to talk to Queenslanders about respect for their money. And to pick that up, what I'm talking about is ministers being held accountable along the way. And if you set a cost and a timeline for delivery, that's got to matter. It's got to count for something. And if you do that, you can deliver more for people. You can deliver more for the amount that's been set. But it's been a runaway train for too long and no one's been held accountable. I look at Wellcamp, which you were heavily involved in. $220 million for an asset Queenslanders don't own that was barely used. You've got to have respect for people's money.
Gentlemen, thank you for that point. We're going to continue on now to some other topics.
David Crisafulli, one of the big factors in what you're talking about now is obviously population growth. Net migration to Queensland on last estimates running at about 113,000 a year. And as we know, we don't have enough houses for everyone, particularly in the southeast. Are you asking Queenslanders to wait for the an LNP government to deliver on its promise to deliver more houses, or will you lobby a federal Labor government to reduce migration, pull back on some of that population growth?
I don't fear growth, Sean. I fear bad governments that can't plan for it. We've put forward a plan to deliver infrastructure, working with councils to make sure that we can accommodate for that growth. We're going to be the first government since the late 70s to abolish a tax. Young people buying or building their first brand new home won't pay a single cent in stamp duty.
So you believe this level of population growth is sustainable, that you can manage it if you're elected?
The federal government will set the population targets. We will make sure that there's infrastructure to cater for what those targets are. Now, I'm deadly serious when I say that I want young Queenslanders to dream of owning a home again. I want vulnerable Queenslanders to have a roof over their head. And over the last 9 years, the level of social housing, the needle has barely moved, only a couple of percent. Now, 3 years ago, there was a $2 billion housing investment fund. That hasn't built one new property that a Queenslander is living in after 3 years. My commitment to Queenslanders is every single cent of that will be used to deliver new supply. But I also want to get young people into the market, and if we deal with supply, we can put pressure on that feeding frenzy we're seeing at the bottom end.
Premier, the housing shortfall has got worse in Queensland since Labor was elected in 2015. Has your government failed to plan for population growth?
Well, we have detailed regional plans to deliver the homes that we will need for that population growth. But Sean's right. We did see a surge in migration, a surge in international migration, as well as a lot of people moving here from other states. And it's taken time for our market to catch up on that. But I know how important it is that Queenslanders can aspire to own a home. You know, When I grew up in Petrie, that was a new estate of families buying houses and land. Now I live in Mango Hill and it's the same kind of thing, and we need to be with councils unlocking that land. That's why I worked with Moreton Bay to get the Caboolture West development up and running and to deliver the infrastructure that will be required for what will be a city bigger than Mackay eventually. That's what our regional plan does. It is a detailed plan to deliver the 1 million homes that we will need.
David, also one of the big problems with building is the cost of building, cost of labour, cost of building supplies. What is your plan to drive down the cost of building in Queensland?
We've spoken a lot about re-establishing the Productivity Commission. That will be the second piece of legislation we take to the Parliament after dealing with youth crime, and that's my first commitment to Queenslanders. And the first order of business for a Productivity Commission will be to do a review of the building industry. My non-negotiables are workers have to be well paid, they have to be safe, contracts have to be honoured, and productivity has to return to job sites. And the reason why we've had this runaway train has been as a result of one militant CFMEU, and the government hasn't been willing to call it out, and on the back of it, it's no longer affordable to construct in Queensland. Productivity has fallen, and that has made projects unviable.
How much longer and will it be until it does become affordable after you're elected then?
Let's say we'll drive down prices by working with the unions who want to be part of productivity. And I want Queenslanders to know that the vast majority of unions want to see workers who are well paid and safe, like I do, but they also want to see productivity return. And the CFMEU does not represent the values of the majority of Queenslanders or indeed Queensland workers. And by turning that culture, I don't owe anything to the CFMEU. By changing that culture, we can make building affordable.
When it comes to housing supply and affordability, Premier, obviously this is a big issue, particularly for the younger voter, and we can put rents into that as well. Many of them are now turning to the Greens and to their housing policy, particularly on those issues and rent caps and social housing. What do you say to them tonight?
Well, part of our Homes for Queenslanders plan supports renters. It delivers things like transferable bond loans for when people have to move. But we also want to help them to save for a deposit. That's why we doubled the first homeowners grant. That's why we abolished stamp duty on homes up to $700,000. And why we're supporting the Australian government's Help to Buy scheme, which will support them through equity and with their deposit so that they can get into the market. So we legislated it to support that scheme so that as soon as it is passed through the federal parliament, it will be available here to Queenslanders. So we want to see everyone benefit. We want to take care of those who are in housing stress. We want to help those who are renting to save for a deposit. And once they get that deposit, we want to help them to buy a home.
A quick yes or no before we move on to our next topic. Can both of you rule out rent caps?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, crime, particularly youth crime, it's a concern for many people. At the most basic level, all Queenslanders have the right to feel safe, and it will be up to one of you to make sure that that happens. Stephen Miles, when you became Premier, you got round-the-clock security, perfectly appropriate. But before that, did you ever feel vulnerable like so many families in Queensland do? And I have wondered, did you ever have to have the conversation with your children about what to do, what might happen if someone breaks into your home?
I think it's always important to talk to children about their personal safety, whether that's in the home or in the community. But you're right, it's important that Queenslanders are safe and they feel safe. That's why when I became the Premier, I made community safety a real priority for me. I delivered those additional police helicopters, first into Townsville and now Cairns and Wide Bay. I delivered the new community safety plan, and the police data shows that that's working. And so we want to continue to invest in the programs that the evidence shows is working.
Did you have that chat to your kids?
Not a single chat, but a fairly continuous conversation about how you keep themselves safe.
Yeah. Opposition leader, your biggest campaign promise is that crime will be lower under the LNP and there'll be fewer victims year on year if you're elected. If you fail to do that, will you resign as Premier?
You bet.
Yeah, how long?
And victim numbers must be lower. And I want Queenslanders to know I'm serious about that. Queensland has the highest number of victims in the country. 289,657. Now that's larger than Victoria and New South Wales despite their surging population. And I'm sorry, but listening to the Premier, it's the same rhetoric we've heard across the last 10 years. The laws were weakened And on the back of it, we've got a generation of untouchables. And you can't cherry pick little bits of figures. It's victim numbers that matter. It's the number of victims, Queenslanders who have had their lives ripped apart. And it was because of a decision by the government a decade ago to weaken the laws. And my commitment to Queenslanders is if government changes, we are not going to Christmas with the same set of laws. The Making Queensland Safer laws will be laws, and it's adult crime, adult time. But we are also serious about early intervention. Gold standard early intervention and rehabilitation with purpose when a young person leaves prison. We cannot do more of the same. It's breaking the state.
Okay, David, so just in front of Queenslanders tonight, you've given that commitment to resign if you do not achieve that metric. By what date will you achieve that metric or resign as Premier?
Tim, we'll be setting targets for fewer victims year on year, and that is important to me. And ultimately, if there aren't fewer victims, Queenslanders would make their own assessment on me, as they have made on this government. They have had enough of the broken promises, and I'm serious about it, and I'm not giving myself any wriggle room. It's victim numbers. It's not number of unique offences and what happens on a Wednesday and how many young people repeat. It's victim numbers. How many people have had their life torn apart, and there will be fewer victims.
So no wriggle room, no wriggle room. By what date will we see that? Will you make that decision?
Well, you'll have an election within 4 years. It's set, and if there aren't fewer victims, I don't think I'll be in a very good position, Tim.
So you won't run at the election?
If there aren't fewer victims, you won't be seeing me.
Tim,
so you'll stand out?
Yes.
I think it's important that David is honest about those victim numbers. They did go down under the Newman government because they excluded a range of domestic violence offenders. They said they only wanted to count the victims that matter. We included domestic violence offences and the full range of domestic violence offences, and so the figures that David quotes includes those additional victims because we consider victims of domestic violence to be real victims that do matter.
David, do you want to be specific then on what metric you're talking about when you will resign if you do not lower the crime figures?
The total
will you
victim
take
numbers.
DV out?
No, of course not.
DV out?
Of course not.
Like you did last time?
Premier, please. Of course not. And of course they matter. Of course they matter. And I just want to make the point that the figures the Premier talk about, it's been year-on-year increase, and we're marked against other states on the year-on-year increase, and the genesis of it is weakening the laws. And you can go back to that decision, and it's every year for the last 10 years.
The inclusion of domestic violence victims.
But it's comparable with every other state. And New South Wales and Victoria, their population...
increased reporting of domestic violence, which is a good thing.
But our numbers are 289,657.
Off the back of your government excluding domestic violence victims.
Okay, so...
Domestic violence victims
after 10 years, of course they do, Premier. Please don't do things like that. That does no one any good.
Well,
when
be
you
honest.
Say something like, and I am. My point is, if you compare us to New South Wales and Victoria, apples with apples, year on year our increase has been larger, and we have more victims than them despite our population being dwarfed by them.
We just wanted to make a point here to the viewers at home that we said we'd have 60 seconds, but obviously there are some questions, answers that need time, and we also want to give you the opportunity to rebut each other. That is the point of a debate. So thank you. We have given you that time, but we are going to move on now, Sean.
Premier, people are obviously scared by the level of crime that they're seeing in the community, but they're also unsettled by the constant debate over crime and over laws. Do you accept that that has undermined public faith in the criminal justice system, and can that be restored?
Well, it can, and it is being restored. Our community safety plan, according to the police data, is driving down crime, driving down the number of offences, the number of youth offences, the number of serious repeat offenders.
But data aside, you still have people, we're still seeing it tonight, saying that individual cases don't end in appropriate punishments, that jail terms aren't long enough, bail laws are too weak. Surely this entire debate, or the whole gamut of it, is undermining the whole system.
I think what undermines the system is politicians implying that it is a simple problem with a simple fix. It is a very complex problem, and we need to address every element of it with a comprehensive plan based on evidence.
Your heart's not in it. Your heart's not in fixing it. You won't admit there's a problem.
That's not
you'll
true.
never be able to
Well, I have more than a slogan.
Oh my
Nobody...
I've written the legislation. By the end of the year, it'll be law.
So you're going to fix it by
change.
Christmas? No crime by Christmas?
If
It is not
Queenslanders
that
vote
simple,
for
David.
change...
It might be that simple in opposition.
Queensland...
Four-word slogans in opposition might work great. But in government, you need to deliver plans, and you need to not just have consequences. Of course, they're important, and that's why we are building additional detention capacity. But you also need early intervention programs, crime prevention and victim support. And that's what our comprehensive plan has. My passion is intervening as early as we can. Let's get these kids when they commit their first offences. Let's get them when they start to disengage from school. Let's get them when they arrive at prep with learning and developmental issues. Let's get them even earlier with health checks and deliver them support. You know, I met a 10-year-old girl recently who'd been running with gangs. And she'd been picked up by one of our intervention programs, and they'd started providing food to her family, and now she is going to school. That's what intervention looks like.
Melissa, if I may, the Premier said about a solution. By the end of the year, the Making Queensland Safer laws will be laws. And adult crime, adult time, we've listed the offences. Detention as a last resort will be removed. In legislation, the rights of victims will be written in to come ahead of the rights of the offender. But we've also spoken about what gold standard early intervention looks like. And experts say at the moment what's happening in Queensland isn't working. And I look at the residential care system. Now, our policy, which has been backed by experts, down to the dollar, $171.59 million, down to the dollar, will turn the tide and give those young people hope. Our child safety reforms will ensure that kids don't fall through the cracks. So it's about all ends of the spectrum, and at the moment it's not working in Queensland. The laws aren't strong enough to send a message of consequences for actions, but we're not doing gold standard early intervention. We're not doing rehabilitation with purpose, and our intention is to change that.
Opposition Leader, we've heard time and time again, time for adult crime, and you've just talked about the suite of measures. The one thing that remains missing though, and one that we hear a lot from our listeners, is this idea of a minimum mandatory sentence. We're talking about these repeat youth offenders. Many of them are known to police, and unfortunately many of them are then known to us because they are the ones who have alleged to have committed some of the worst, most heinous crimes that have been front page news. Why are you still so reluctant to have a minimum mandatory sentence for some of those repeat youth offenders who go through the revolving door?
Well, as part of adult crime, adult time, there will be minimum mandatory of life for murder. So that's the first change. And I think anyone who has seen young people after taking away lives walk away with only 6 years would know that that is a very reasonable response. On the other matters, what we're doing with adult crime, adult time is lifting the threshold to ensure that a more appropriate penalty can be found. We are unshackling the judiciary, including by removing detention as last resort. Now, at the moment, what happens is when a young person goes before the magistrate, because there is a provision that says detention must be a last resort, time and time again, you see that revolving door. So we are turning the corner and making sure that we can have consequences for actions.
But David, on those minimum
you've asked me
mandatories
before, Sophie, and I have said I won't rule it out into the future. I'm not going to be somebody who says that if stronger laws are needed, that we won't embark on that. But our first tranche of laws will make a difference, and they will be laws by Christmas if Queenslanders vote for change.
Opposition Leader, moving to health, you've been very critical of the performance of the Queensland health system, but you haven't got a plan of your own specifically as yet that you've unveiled. Where is your health plan?
Well, that's not the case, Tim. Within 100 days of the election, Queenslanders will see in real time what's happening in their hospitals in real time. Now, at the moment, the data gets released many months overdue, often on a weekend. And what we do know is in the last 6 months, the Queensland ambulance ramping, that's the number of ambos that are stuck too long at the end of a ramp, has reached 45% and has stayed at 45%. That's the highest figure ever recorded in any Australian state or territory. 12 months ago, the government said it would be 28% by today, and the needle hasn't moved. Now, my commitment is to change the way that Queensland Health operates and give doctors and nurses the resources they need at the front line. We are going to put them back in charge. We have health and hospital boards. They should be running the show, and that data in real time will make a difference. It will enable me to hold the minister accountable, but it will also enable 5.5 million Queenslanders to see what's happening in real time and staff to be able to fight for their fair share of resources. Now, above all, we're going to get rid of Labor's patient tax, which comes in July. A whopping big tax in the middle of a health and cost of living crisis. That's the genesis of a very strong health plan, and we'll have more to say in the days ahead.
Again,
Thank you.
With respect, you say a genesis of a health plan.
Yeah.
You know, to borrow a phrase there, concepts of a plan.
Well-
Like I've read your health plan. There's no specifics in there. There's no ramping targets. There's no talk about elective surgeries. How are you actually going to fix it with specifics? Where's your ramping target?
You've asked me about ramping targets, and I've said that the moment the government releases the final figure for the September quarter...
You just said they were 45%.
No, that was the last release figure.
They've been 45% for the last 18 months.
Well, let's see where they are at the end of the September quarter, which the Premier could release tonight.
We released interim data 2 weeks ago.
We would
July
like to
and
see.
August.
We'd like to see the September quarter data, and that will form the starting point.
It shows that Post has improved.
It's 45%, the worst in the country, worst ever
1.5%
recorded.
better than it was.
Tim, we're going to get rid of Labor's patient tax. Now, if you speak to the GPs...
No such thing.
Well,
There is no such thing, David.
Well, I'm sorry, Premier.
So is any doctor paying a patient tax right now? A single one?
It comes in after the election. It comes after the election, which is what is so sneaky about it.
Made up, David.
Well, it's in a different interpretation of payroll tax.
No, I'm sorry, Tim. It's a whopping big tax on your family GP. And this is what the Australian Medical Association has said. It'll end bulk billing, it'll force clinics to close, and it will put pressure on the EDs. The Premier can shake his head, but it's the doctors that say it. The Australian Medical Association of Queensland. Are they wrong?
David's just making things up.
My goodness.
The fact is, no doctors in Queensland are paying any payroll tax. They are currently in other states as the result of a court ruling. We gave them an amnesty for a significant period of time so that they can structure their affairs appropriately. This is simply...
There's $100 million in the forwards per annum. $100 million in the forwards.
Scare campaigns, David.
But it's
you talk about
$100
scare
million.
campaigns. This is a classic one.
Premier, Labor's been in power since 2015 and in control of the health system. You had a stint as health minister, I think, when I was health editor. Is our system, Queensland's health system, in better or worse shape now?
There's no doubt there are pressures, Sean, and they're very significant pressures.
And have those pressures put it in a worse shape than it was when Labor inherited?
Well, the pressures are greater now than they have been, in part because of bulk billing, population growth, ageing population. People are presenting with more complex needs, but we have responses to address those, and across all of the metrics, our health system and our health workers are doing a fantastic job. They are getting people their outpatient appointments, they're getting them their surgeries. The median wait time at our emergency departments is just 15 minutes. 100% of Category 1 patients are seen within 2 minutes. We are the only mainland state that has an entirely free ambulance service. And that means our EDs are bearing more of the load than in other states because of that collapse in primary health care. But Queenslanders should know that despite what the LNP says, our health system is world class, and I'm very proud of it.
If I might, Sean, the answer is it categorically is in a far worse shape, and it's not the fault of the doctors or nurses, the AMBOs or the allied health professionals. They're the ones trying to hold the broken system together.
They're the ones you sacked.
When the government came to office...
Your answer was to sack them.
If I might, Premier. When the government came to office, ambulance ramping was at 15%. It had already doubled before COVID. Today, on the latest data, it's at 45%. There are 61,000 Queenslanders on the surgical waiting list, 287,000 waiting just to see the specialist to get on the waiting list. It's in crisis. And until the Premier admits it's in crisis, he would never be capable of fixing it.
We're going to move on to our next question.
I'll note we still haven't seen the LNP's targets for those. But Premier, sources have given me information that the Department of Premier and Cabinet has investigated the legalising of cannabis for, quote, recreational purposes. Is this true?
There are people in the public service that do all sorts of work, but we have no intention of making that change.
So you can rule out you're not going to legalise cannabis?
That's correct.
Opposition Leader, you voted against the government's voluntary assisted dying laws. How will you change them if you become Premier?
I've said to you, Tim, we don't have plans to change them. And you've asked me that on multiple occasions, and the only people who are talking about those sorts of issues is the government trying to run a scare campaign. So I can assure you we don't have plans to make those changes.
These are the kinds of weasel words we get from David. Don't have plans to means something different to will not happen.
May I do better?
He says
will not happen. Will not happen.
You can't guarantee that.
Oh my goodness.
I say you're not going to have a conscience vote if there's a private member's vote.
Will not happen.
You can't guarantee
Well, you asked me to say it, so I did, and then you're still not happy.
So your beliefs have changed. Has that happened? Have your beliefs changed?
It is not part of our plan. It will not happen.
What matters is your values and what you believe.
Well, our focus is fixing the mess you've created. Youth crime, health, housing, cost of living. That's our focus. It's going to take every day of 4 years to fix that mess. And my commitment to Queenslanders is that is going to be our relentless focus.
Won't have
and
plans.
Things will be better. Not happening.
Gentlemen,
asked
thank
me
you.
to say not happening.
Thank
so
you
I did.
for now. We are going
and
to
you're
take...
still not happy.
We are going to take a pause in the hostilities there. We have asked a number of questions to these two gentlemen, but on the other side of this break, they will have the opportunity to question each other. You are watching a 9 News special event, The Great Debate, on 9, 4BC and the Brisbane Times.
Only 9 News breaks the major Queensland state political stories.
Kim, you have breaking exclusive news.
Night after night.
Channel 9 News, they got it first.
From secret budget papers to car rego cuts, Yvette Darth sacking, police commissioner quits, Olympic scrapping plan and 50-cent fares.
Saw it on Channel 9 when it broke that
The
night.
2024 state election.
Chances are you'll find out before.
Anyone else on 9 News?
Welcome back to The Great Debate. It is time now for our leaders to question each other. Premier, you gave the first opening statement, so the first question goes to you, David Crisafulli.
Thanks, Melissa. Premier, in 2015, the government boasted about weakening the youth justice laws. On the back of it, Queensland has seen a generation of untouchables, young repeat offenders, more victim numbers than anywhere else. Why did you take that decision, and do you regret making it?
Well, David, as you know, anyone who pretends it's as simple as one decision and can be fixed as simply as one four-word slogan is just being dishonest with Queenslanders. It is a much more complex problem than that and requires a much more complex solution. And that's what I've put in place since I became the Premier. I've changed some of those laws, as you know. I've introduced a new plan, a fully costed plan based on what the police tell us is working. And it's delivering more police, high visibility policing, better resources for them, as well as early intervention and prevention of crime and greater support for victims. That's what our plan does. It is a comprehensive plan backed by evidence and experts. And you still haven't found any experts to support the four-word slogan that you're taking to this election.
Queenslanders back it. I asked why and do you regret it?
I've been very clear that that is a oversimplification of what is a very complex problem, and that might be fun in opposition, but it's not going to serve you in government.
It's not fun for Queenslanders. It's not fun for Queenslanders living it.
Premier, your turn to ask a question.
Thanks, Melissa. Labor released our costings before the election campaign. You've made billions of dollars of commitments, but you haven't told Queenslanders how you will fund them. On Tuesday, you'll receive a briefing from the Treasury with a current budget position. Will you tell Queenslanders how you will fund your promises before they start voting Monday week?
Our plans are fully costed and fully funded, and you know that. And I mentioned
Well,
before...
why won't you show Queenslanders?
Well, we have on every one. Every policy we have taken, down to the dollar, we have shown Queenslanders what it's going to cost. And along with every opposition at all levels of government, when announcements are made, they will be fully costed if you're serious. And ultimately, the tax plan will be released in full once all the announcements have been made.
At the last minute.
But as we have gone along, we have shown to the dollar. And I want Queenslanders to know respect for your money is one of the values that we will take into government if we were given the privilege of governing. I don't believe in the runaway train continuing. And Queenslanders have seen that we are fair income about it. We are not embarking on the $24 billion pumped hydro scheme. We don't believe that that would allow Queenslanders to turn on their electricity and not be able to afford it. Now, that's a vastly different area, and you haven't said how you're going to pay for that. That's a whopping big hole. Our plans are fully costed, fully funded, and it's the fresh start that Queensland needs.
Mr Crisafulli, you have the next question.
Thank you. The Australian Medical Association says the patient tax, which comes in after the election and is slated to generate $100 million per annum in the budget, will see the death of bulk billing. It will mean that surgeries will close, and it will put pressure on our emergency departments that are already buckling at the seams. Why would you embark in the middle of a health and cost of living crisis? Why would you embark on a patient tax that makes it dearer to go to see the GP and puts more pressure on a buckling system?
Well, there is no such thing as a patient tax, David. You know that. It's something that you've made up. What we are doing, though, is stepping in to provide those primary healthcare services. So just today we opened another one of our nurse-led clinics where Queenslanders can walk in without an appointment and get that care. We're also making sure all of our pharmacies can deliver many of the services that in the past people would need a GP's appointment to get, because at the moment people struggle to get one. So we are putting measures in place to make sure Queenslanders can get the primary care they need. But let's be honest about who crippled bulk billing. 10 years of the LNP's freeze on bulk billing is what really killed it.
You're talking about Canberra?
Yes.
Oh, right, okay.
And the Labor government has since increased those bulk billing rebates,
right,
but they need to continue to increase so that we can continue to see more bulk billing, because at the end of the day, that's what's putting the pressure on our hospitals.
Back to Queensland that we're responsible for. The Australian Medical Association says it's a patient's tax. The Australian Medical Association are the ones calling it out. And I back a doctor over you.
We're going to move on now. Premier, you have the next question.
Thank you. David, you've made $16.2 billion worth of spending commitments already. You've said you'll have lower debt and lower taxes. The money has to come from somewhere. The last time you did this, it came from 14,000 people losing their jobs. How will you fund it?
It'll be fully costed and fully funded, and I've made a commitment to the public service that they are going to get better than what they're getting at the moment. They need to be part of the change.
Nothing to fear.
They need to be part of the change. And when I read the Coldrake review, I see the culture that has permeated in the last 10 years. And I want the public service to know that we are serious about making sure that they are valued, they're respected, and that they can get the professional development courses, the ability to work across the private sector, security in their jobs, to be part of the change that's needed. But you mentioned about our fully costed plan. We aren't embarking on the $24 billion pumped hydro plan that you are committed to, and you can't afford it. And the reason you can't afford it is there's no EIS, no planning approval, no traditional owner consent, and the impact on Queenslanders' power bills you won't reveal. What we do know, though, is it's $24 billion. And if you put that on Queenslanders, they would not afford to be able to run their refrigerator, let alone stock it.
Well, that's a lot of words to not answer my question.
Gentlemen, thank you for that. We're going to move on. Now, leading Queensland is a big job, and we know Queenslanders will want accountability and honesty. So keeping that in mind, interesting that you've both accused each other of not being as honest as you could be. We're going to move on. Sophie, you have the next question.
Fair to say that you're both being haunted by ghosts of Premier past. So Premier, this question is for you. Are you a better Premier than Anastasia Palaszczuk?
Well, that'll be for Queenslanders to judge come October 26. I know that I'm a very different Premier, a very different kind of leader, and I have tried to demonstrate that, done my best to demonstrate that in the 10 months that I have been the Premier, in the hope that come October 26, Queenslanders give me a chance, a mandate to continue to do that for 4 more years.
She was obviously pushed out because of disastrous polling. If you're not better, what does that say to Queensland?
Well, I've spent this 10 months showing Queenslanders the kind of Premier I would be if I had the chance to lead for 4 years. And now, in the lead up to the election, I'm outlining for them my longer term plans for our state's future. And I've developed those plans based on things I've wanted to do for a long time, like 50-cent fares. That was a passion of mine when I was catching the train all the way in from Petrie, to longer term plans on healthcare, on cheaper energy, on community safety, on housing.
Our next question is from editor of Brisbane Times, Sean Parnell.
David Crisafulli, how can you promise to be a Premier for all Queenslanders when you'll have comparatively fewer women in Cabinet and you have candidates who are actively campaigning against our abortion laws? What does that say about the government you'll lead?
Well, let me start with the second bit. They won't be changing. And I've said that. It's a very sensitive issue.
So you said the same about assisted dying, that those laws, so you'll also stare down those elements in your party that want change?
That's correct. It's not, that won't be occurring. And
you had a frontbencher on the news tonight.
Might I say, the fact that in my mind, you've crossed the line in the way that the social media campaign has been run from Labor Party headquarters. It's been very, very disappointing. And I want Queenslanders to know that that campaign is incorrect. It is a scare campaign and it won't be changing. In answer to your second part, one of the things I said when I became leader is I wanted an LNP that reflected a modern Queensland. And I said that I would be held accountable for attracting more young people, more women, more people from small and family background, and more people from culturally diverse backgrounds. Of the 14 most winnable seats, 10 are women. We've got half the candidates are women. The majority of candidates in marginal seats are women. We have people born in Greece, we have people born in Laos, we have people born in India. We have a reflective of a modern Queensland. People from small and family business background. It is a breadth, it is a freshness, and we are offering Queenslanders a fresh start.
Our next question from Nine's state political editor, Tim Javier.
Premier, you keep on trying to differentiate yourself from Anastasia Palaszczuk and say you're leading this fresh new government, but you had 4 years as Deputy Premier. What happened there? Did Anastasia not listen to you, or were you a bit of a yes man as Deputy?
Well, I haven't been trying to differentiate myself. I am very different. And there is a difference between being a member of a team and being the leader, being the Premier. And what I've tried to do these 10 months is show Queenslanders what kind of Premier I am, more about who I am so that they understand my beliefs and values, because it's one thing to talk about the issues of the day. Voters need to understand how you all approach the issues of the next 4 years, and that's what I've tried to do these 10 months, work hard, listen to them, deliver for them. That's what I would do if I had the chance, a mandate in my own right, for 4 more years.
David, you want to be trusted with Queensland's economy, but your last business went belly up and you had to pay $200,000. How did you let that happen?
Tim, you've read the report and you know that there were no findings against me, and you know I met my obligations. And Queenslanders need to know that they're the values that I learnt on the family sugar farm. That's the values of accepting responsibility, and that's important to me.
Can you explain that to Queenslanders who may not know about this? Can you explain why you had to pay $200,000?
Because when you are a director, you have responsibilities and you meet them. And I was only with that company for 4 months.
You only met a fraction of them.
I was only with that company for 4 months and I met all my obligations, and you know that. And the document that was tabled, the document that was tabled in the final sitting of Parliament was printed 3 years before. 3 years.
So 1.4 million outstanding to the tax office?
The last one.
1.6 million.
Well, Premier, you know that's not the case. You've read the report.
I did read the report.
You know that there were no findings against me. You know.
Why would you pay $200,000 if there was no findings?
You meet obligations.
I think it's a question.
That's what people do.
People don't.
Sorry. I was going to say, Opposition Leader, I think it's more of a question about your business judgment here. Can you actually explain how you got yourself in that pickle? Because that doesn't happen to people every day.
Yeah, I came into a business with a promise from the owners that there'd be capital, and when it didn't eventuate, I left that business after 4 months. But I met all my obligations and there were no findings. And I think that shows about my character, that when I say I'm going to do something, I do. And respect for your money matters to me. And, you know, in life I've had wins and I've had losses, but overall I'm somebody who values my word. And that genesis of that started on a family sugar farm. And we still own a family sugar farm. And I'm proud of those roots, and they're the values that drive me.
When it comes to the campaign, I have to say, on behalf of Queensland, neither of you come to this with clean hands. I think it's really disappointing that we've seen the Medi-Scare campaign, you talk about the social media, but this is also coming from the party that you lead as well, Mr Crisafulli. Queenslanders tell me every day that they've lost trust in the political process and they're over the party politics, and it means that a lot of people, because of it, are disengaged. So why are you both allowing these sorts of tactics to go on in your name?
Both of you.
Well, sometimes scare campaigns can be true. You know, last time the LNP were elected, they committed that no public servant had anything to fear. They committed that all of our nurses and doctors, that their jobs were safe.
But I've also heard from plenty of those public servants that they were happy to take that redundancy, that they were paid out because they were at that point where they were ready to leave the public service.
I know plenty that weren't. You know, I sat with them, I met with them. There are many people who still approach me in the street and say, I got Newmaned. That happens every single day. And that's David's record. It's not a scare campaign to highlight that that's the last time he and his party were in government, that's how they paid for those big unfunded promises. And now again, they have $16.2 billion of promises. They say they want to reduce tax and reduce debt. Well, the money has to come from somewhere.
It's disappointing in that a number of the things that are being said at the moment are categorically untrue and deeply disappointing, and in some cases hugely divisive.
If you released your costings, we'd know.
Hugely divisive.
If you released your costings, we'd know.
Hugely divisive. And I want Queenslanders to know that I'm choosing hope over fear, and you're going to see a lot more of it. That's what governments do when they get desperate.
I don't think anyone thinks you're choosing hope over fear.
I'm charting a fresh course for this state, and this state has never needed change more than it does. We are a reformed political entity, we are focused, we are disciplined, and we are determined to give this state the fresh start that it deserves.
Premier, it's been 3 years since we won the Olympics. Has the government done a good job so far?
Well, we have a comprehensive venues plan that we're delivering on. All of those venues go through detailed analysis, and many of them are now contracted out for tender, construction underway.
The question was, though, have you done a good job?
We're going to deliver a great Olympics, a fantastic Olympics. We have more than $7 billion.
It's not a yes, though. You haven't.
It's going to be a great Olympics.
Yeah, so have you done a good job so far? Because you also, we want to trust you to do a good job over the next 3-4 years. So have you done? What's your track record here? Are you going to stand by? Have you done a good job?
This is going to be a great Olympics, and we have excellent venues planned.
You're not saying yes, Premier.
Well, I mean, David says he does want a new stadium and doesn't want a new stadium.
We'll get to that in a second. We'll get to him in a second. But have you done a good job?
We are delivering a $7.1 billion venues plan. They will be great venues. It will be a fantastic Olympics, and I'll be very proud to have played a part in it.
So who bears the responsibility for not doing a good job? Is that you or Anastasia Palaszczuk?
I had the job of Minister Assisting for Olympic Infrastructure, Olympic and Paralympic Infrastructure. That delivered the venues plan, and that's the venues plan that we're working to.
Okay, so Anastasia then. I'll hand over to Sophie.
Sean, I think.
David Crisafulli, Stephen Miles there said they have a comprehensive plan. As much as I hate that phrase when I hear it from politicians, your comprehensive plan is to have a 100-day review. Are you really asking Queenslanders to accept that where you stand now, on this day, at this point in the campaign, you don't have any firm views that you want to see delivered for this Olympics?
I do have some firm views, Sean, and after 1,000 days of chaos and crisis, and I'm sorry, when I speak to Queenslanders, they use the word embarrassed. They are embarrassed about what's happened in the last 1,000 days. And we're asking Queenslanders for 100 days to sort out a mess of more than 1,000, but I've got some firm views. The proposal to go and spend over $1.5 billion on temporary facilities at Cusack makes no sense. And the only person I've heard that says it makes sense is Stephen.
So you're going to build a new stadium?
But that was never the deal.
Are you going to build a new stadium?
No, and you know that.
Well, what are you...
So, may I? When the Olympics were bid for, it was about generational infrastructure. Road and rail, a 20-year tourism plan, using the Paralympics to create accessible cities. Let's use the ability that comes with telecommunication upgrades to build disaster resilience into what we do. That's what the vision was. It was about generational infrastructure. What happened is it became this internal power game where they were pushing everyone out. They were pushing the federal government out, the councils out, and it's a mess.
So where
and
will you
we're
do the
asking
athletics?
for 100 days
Where will you do the athletics?
to sort out the mess.
So
Gentlemen, we're going to leave that there for now because we are getting to an interesting part of this debate now. We're coming to the end, but we want to get to know you both a little bit better. So Sean has a question for both of you.
David Crisafulli, people know that you have sought to, I guess, save yourself until the end. Some people say you're a small target. You've been quoted as saying that the LNP opposition's made no mistakes. I want to know, as leader of the LNP, what's the biggest risk you've taken as leader of that party, going against the grain to stand up for something that you believe is right?
Every day in leadership, you have to stand up for things. Every single day. And what I've done is led a united team. And as a result of that, there have been things that, as a group, we've taken a consensus decision and we stayed unified. For 4 years, there hasn't been a leak out of our shadow cabinet in 4 years. Now, I contrast that with a debate where the government was discussing cancelling the Olympics, and by the time of the nightly news, 5 people had confirmed that that was the case. We have been united. And as a result of that means there are decisions that have been taken that have been troubling. but we've done it collectively. And we've got to the point in the cycle where we're putting ourselves forward to Queenslanders. And I know the government uses those terms, but Queenslanders don't. We've put forward comprehensive plans with timelines to fix youth crime, health, housing and long-term cost of living, while also giving that short-term commitment to help people doing it tough at the moment because of bad decisions.
Tim.
Premier, what's the biggest challenge you've faced since becoming Premier?
Oh, the natural disasters that hit immediately after becoming Premier were particularly challenging, especially given that they were in two disparate parts of the state, you know, Cairns in the far north and on the Gold Coast. And I spent as much time as I could in those communities. I helped lead that disaster response. I'm proud of what our emergency services and first responders and our reconstruction authority were able to do there. But without a doubt, those couple of weeks of trying to be in the Gold Coast and in Cairns at the same time was the hardest time.
Gentlemen, a question for you both. What do you respect? This is a quick answer. What do you respect about each other?
I respect anyone who puts their hand up to do this job. You know, it is a challenging job. You'd have to love it and love our state to put in what it takes. And so, of course, I respect that about David.
I love that he's come from humble beginnings. His dad was a factory worker, and I bet she's proud of him.
Thank you for that. We are going to speed things up a little bit now with some rapid fire questions. These are quick questions, quick answers for both of you, please. So let's go. Who is your political hero?
Bob Hawke.
I don't have one. My hero is my late grandfather, and I've never had a political hero.
If there's a hung parliament, will you negotiate with the crossbench?
Absolutely not. I've said no, but there's been a little bit of each way from the man beside me, but no.
No deals from me.
All right, you're keeping it quicker than you, so here we go.
That's always
Will
the
you
case.
consider a daylight saving trial?
No.
Absolutely not.
Favourite movie?
I like that.
I thought you were going to say Top Gun then.
I was about to say Top Gun.
I like that rerun of the 2015 Grand Final where my Cowboys beat his Broncos. That was a good movie.
Premier?
Not that movie.
No. Top Gun?
Top Gun.
Okay, favourite band?
Oh, I like Bruce Springsteen, but he's not a band.
Powderfinger.
E Street,
Powderfinger.
Powderfinger. Do you read the comments on social media?
I try not to, Melissa. Try not to. I
always regret it.
Yeah. Don't we all? Don't we all? You're both fitness enthusiasts. What's your most impressive sporting feat?
I'm less sporty than you'd think, actually. But I did do deadlifts this morning. I was proud of that.
Okay.
I don't have a long highlights reel. And
Apart from missing your families, which so many people do with their jobs, what's the worst thing about being a politician?
having to try and find a different place to train every morning. That is a genuine challenge.
Being away is far and away the hardest bit.
Yeah. What would you do if you weren't a politician?
I love this job.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's a great privilege. It's a great privilege to do a job like this. It really is.
Yeah.
If you lose the election, will you still commit to a full term?
Yes.
Yes, but I'm trying not to.
Me too.
And easy question. Is Queensland the best state in Australia?
It's the best country in the world.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time tonight. That is it. We are out of time, but we will end with a closing statement from each of you. Your pitch to voters. Premier, you gave the first opening statement and you will go again first now.
Thanks, Melissa. Our plans for our great state are working and we are moving our state forward. Now is not the time to risk going backwards. David has a $16.2 billion hole in his costings. And the money has to come from somewhere. Last time it came from the jobs of our public servants. And we can't afford those cuts just as we are getting back on our feet. As Premier, I have delivered on my plan for cost of living and I will continue to deliver on my plan for our state's future. Queenslanders can know that every single day, in ways big and small, I will be doing my best to make their life better.
David Crisafulli.
Well, there you have it. Fear. And I'm offering hope. And I want Queenslanders to know that we are serious about addressing the big four crises, all four of them, and ministers will be held accountable and Queenslanders will be better off. We won't be talking about a soaring number of victims. There will be fewer victims. We won't be talking about ambulance ramping increasing year on year and surgical waiting lists blowing out. We'll be talking about a world-class health system and having health services when you need them. We won't be talking about electricity rises going 3 times the national average. We'll be talking about using those power generators to put downward pressure on people's prices. And we won't be talking about growing social housing waiting lists. We'll be talking about more young Queenslanders owning a home and the vulnerable with a roof over their head. And I want Queenslanders to know that there is a better way. There's a better way than what they're getting at the moment. And I'm offering change and a fresh start for Queensland's future.
David Crisafulli, Stephen Miles, thank you so much for your time tonight. We really do wish you well because our state is in your hands. Thank you so much for your time. And we hope this debate has given you at home a clearer idea of who you will vote for on election day. Well, as for who won this debate, we will be back on the other side of this short break to hear our panel's verdict. This is The Great Debate on 9, 4BC and the Brisbane Times.
Only 9 News breaks the major Queensland state political stories.
Tim, you have breaking exclusive news.
Night after night.
Channel 9 News, they got it first.
From secret budget papers to car rego cuts, Yvette Darth sacking, police commissioner quits, Olympic scrapping plan and 50-cent fares.
Saw it on Channel 9 when it broke that
The
night.
2024 state election.
Chances are you'll find out before.
Anyone else on 9 News?
Welcome back. Premier Stephen Miles and Opposition Leader David Crisafulli have just finished vying for your vote here on The Great Debate. The question now is who won? But first, I'd like to know from our panel, what was the one key moment in your minds? First to you, Sean Parnell, editor of Brisbane Times.
Look, the one thing I realised quite early in that debate was that both the leaders were trying to achieve something completely different. David Crisafulli was trying to show to us here and show to Queenslanders that he has a plan, he's done his homework and that he's ready. Stephen Miles, on the other hand, was trying to show everyone that government is actually quite hard and that under the circumstances, Labor has done quite well. And I think, to me, and that's what I'll be talking about in terms of who won, they were 2 very different challenges for them. And it was very interesting to see that that's where they must think that they're both vulnerable.
Sophie Formica, 4BC afternoon host.
You know, Melissa, we covered so much ground and yet I'm sitting here thinking, oh, there's so many things that I still would like to ask and we will over time for the people of Queensland. Youth crime is where I sit still with this because the responses were so very different. And we can understand that the Premier is saying it's a really complex problem and when you're the one that's making the decisions, this is not an easy thing to fix. And that may be true, but the people of Queensland who are feeling unsafe and the people who are having their houses broken into and their cars stolen would listen to what we heard from the opposition leader who's saying what we are doing is not working. Now, by the metrics that the Premier is trying to suggest to us, we should be saying it's okay, things will eventually get better. I think that the people of Queensland, though, in that particular area of youth crime, particularly repeat youth offenders, will be looking towards something very different. And we heard something very different tonight from the opposition leader.
Tim Martin.
Yeah, and what I think is that David Crisafulli's big moment was committing to resign if he doesn't fix those metrics where he talks about youth crime. If he becomes Premier, as the polls and the bookies suggest he will, that is going to be something that now hangs over him for the next 4 years. So you talk about a key moment, that is something we're going to be talking again and again about. And we're also talking about who won this debate. That is a big thing, a big takeaway that David Crisafulli wants to show. He's going to do something on crime, and it sort of covers over some of the things that he didn't talk about. He was asked about his energy plan. He didn't provide specifics on that. No specifics on the health plan. He was asked about that, and also didn't answer where he would do the athletics in terms of where a new stadium is going to be. So there is still holes in David Crisafulli's policy platform, but that was a big moment.
All right, so let's look at who won and why. Sean, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, look, picking up from what Tim said there, and our views on who won this debate aren't intended to necessarily influence voters. Voters may have made up their own mind. This may have changed their mind, and whatever they vote, however they vote on October 26 is completely up to them. But I do think, even though the Premier appeared at times quite frustrated, and even though I think David Crisafulli at times appeared too prepared, too scripted, I think long term, tonight's debate has landed some blows on David Crisafulli. Those areas where he doesn't have a plan and where he had to commit tonight on the spot to acting in a particular way if he wins. And
so you're saying the Premier won?
I think long term, David Crisafulli lost.
Okay, Sophie.
Yeah, I don't want to be the fence sitter. So I think in terms of performance and comfort, I actually think that even though David Crisafulli tends to have in his back pocket the slogans and he's very well prepared in terms of how to answer questions, he's been doing a lot of work in this space. Tonight we got a little bit more breadth. There's still detail that is missing. I think from an energy perspective, certainly here in the space, I felt like he was more energetic in the way that he delivered his vision tonight. I'm still not convinced that either of them can really shape what happens beyond 4 years. You know, I think that's the next question for Queensland to really be thinking about. The next 4 years is great, but the decisions made in the next 4 years are going to affect the next 14 and the next 40.
So did you pick a winner?
Well, I probably lean on the side of it's time for some change. And I do think that Stephen Miles sat for a very long time next to the previous Premier, nodding along, and if he felt that there were things that needed to be changed during the very long period that he was already able to affect the direction of Queensland and he didn't do that, you had a chance and you didn't use it well.
So David Crisafulli won the debate. Yes, Tim.
I've similar sentiments to Sophie. I don't think you can ignore what is the bigger picture here, which is at the moment the LNP are $1.05 with bookmakers, Labor's at 11. So I think Stephen Miles had a lot more work to do here tonight in terms of trying to win back support that Labor's lost. I think he made some good arguments, but I think overall, and David Crisafulli played it a lot safer tonight, but I think watching their both performances, I think that David Crisafulli comes out of the winner in terms of the big picture here, because I don't think that performance from Stephen Miles makes up a lot of ground. However, I see both of these people every day, and my phone's blowing up with a lot of people telling me who they think won, and it's varied. I'm already getting a lot of texts from especially women saying that they think that Stephen Miles won and they were surprised by his performance. So I think there is a lot of positives from Stephen Miles. And I've just got a text here from, believe it or not, Campbell Newman, and he's delivered his verdict, and it is, quote unquote, the Premier smashed him.
Wow, there you
go.
So
Campbell Newman thinks Stephen Miles won.
So who did you actually think won, though?
I'll go for David Crisafulli on the basis of the bigger picture.
Yes.
Even though, notwithstanding, and I mentioned some of those questions that David Crisafulli did not answer before, I don't think there was any fatal blows to him that will cause his odds of $1.05 to blow out, though.
It's good to know the ghost is still there, though.
That's right, yes. I mean, it is just an hour, isn't it? It's an hour of their time. We are looking at 4 years. So there's so much more to think about for Queensland voters. But thank you very much, our panel. We really appreciate your time tonight. But that is where we will leave our coverage of the great debate. On behalf of 9 News, the Brisbane Times and Radio 4BC, thank you for being with us. Of course, we will have comprehensive coverage throughout the campaign as Queensland decides who should lead our state. For now, good night.